Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar about the Stanford Biodesign Innovation Fellowship. My name is Emily Johnson, and I'm the Fellowships Manager here at Stanford Biodesign. And I want to welcome you today from wherever you may be watching in the world. As you pop on, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always great to see our international scope and interest of the program. So leading the webinar today will be Dr. Todd Brinton, our Fellowship Director. Dr. Brinton is an interventional cardiologist and professor here at Stanford. And he'll first give a presentation about our fellowship and the objectives of the program. And then at the end, we'll have time for a Q&A session with your questions. Please type your questions using the Q&A feature in your webinar dashboard. And we'll wait until Dr. Brinton has concluded his presentation before we answer your questions. Also, this session will be recorded and posted on our website in case you miss any part of it. So thank you again for joining us, and I'll now give the time over to Dr. Brinton.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us, or I should say good evening, depending on what part of the world you're dialing in from. So we're going to take about 40 minutes to give you an overview of our Biodesign Fellowship here at Stanford. So Biodesign Fellowship was founded in 2000, is now going to be going into its 18th year. And in fact, we just graduated this last week, our 215th fellow. So this is a fairly well-established fellowship, as many of you know. And the goal today is to give you an overview of the fellowship, some of the background of the structure of the fellowship, our goals, and ultimately give you an idea of the process that we think is most important for innovation. So with that, let me give you a little bit of a background on the fellowship itself. The picture that's featured on this first slide is the Clark Center, which is where we're actually centered here on the Stanford campus. We're very fortunate to be based in one of the elite centers in the United States. If you go to the next slide. All right, so we're based on the Stanford campus. As many know, Stanford's one of the really elite universities in the United States. We're very fortunate. You see in the kind of middle left, Biodesign, which sits in the Clark building, is centered on campus here between the School of Medicine and the School of Engineering. You see down the D School, one of the famous innovation centers across multiple fields, is based here on campus. We have a very strong relationship with the business school as well. Why is that important to you? I think it's been shown that the closer you are in proximity to the hospital, the engineering staff, and the business folks, that they're all on the same campus, the greater the opportunity to interact and collaborate with many of these different schools. So let me give you a background of the fellowship. It's a one-year fellowship, what we call process-driven health technology innovation. We are based on the principle of multidisciplinary teams. This means the areas of science, medicine, engineering, as well as business and operations. We every year now have 12 US fellows here. We also have 4 Singapore fellows from our Singapore Stanford Biodesign program that actually are here from January to June. The program for the fellowship begins in August and runs through the middle of June. As I said, we just graduated our fellows this last week. So the aims of the program are to develop the next generation of leaders in health technology innovation, ultimately to teach a repeatable need-driven methodology for healthcare technology innovation, and teach business fundamentals for the implementation of innovations. Let me pause here and give you a little bit of color to this. This is not a master's program. This is not a PhD program. And this is certainly an educational program, but there's 2 major components. One is education, and the other one is the enablement of the development of technology. And so I would assess this as a mentorship or an apprenticeship, the opportunity to work on self-driven technologies with help and assistance from great innovators here in Silicon Valley. A little bit of history on the program. We first started the fellowship in 2000, having our first class of fellows in 2001. We founded our Stanford India Biodesign program in 2008, which is a joint venture between the university and between the government of India. We ultimately founded the Singapore Biodesign program in 2010, and we're now obviously in our 8th year. And we actually developed a global faculty training program in 2014. They've had fellows from a number of universities in Japan, in Europe as well. This is the management team. The program was founded originally by Paul Yock, Tom Crummell, who is the chair of surgery here, and the surgeon chief at Packard Children's Hospital has been the co-director since the merger of the Biodesign program and the Surgical Innovation program back in 2006. Gordon Saul is our executive director, and he's been here for almost 5 years. He comes from the venture capital industry and mostly interfaces with the outside world, including sponsors, venture groups, and helps in the technology transfer areas. I will be entering this next year, my 13th year as the fellowship director. Lyndon N. is our director of academic programs, and Carolyn Hell is our director of operations, finance, and really covers HR. Core faculty, probably the two most important people or three most important people on this slide are up in the upper left, Dan Izaguri, who was a former fellow from about 7 years ago, was our assistant fellowship director who actively spends time every week with the fellows. On the lower middle, James Wall is also assistant director in the Innovation Fellowship who spends time with the fellows each week. On the upper right, probably our most popular faculty member is Doug Raitt, who is our Associate Director of Team Learning and Dynamics, who spends time with you almost every week on kind of how you interact and how you actually optimize innovation when working on a team. And it probably would not be complete if I didn't mention Josh Mackauer, who was the co-founder of the program, is still a senior advisor to the program. Our global faculty, as I mentioned, we have programs in India and Singapore, as well as Japan, and this is the leadership group that runs that program. The next slide, probably the most important of all the people on here, was just the person that did the introduction, Emily Johnson, who really spearheads our program. She manages the entire fellowship program from soup to nuts. She's the person you'll interact with when you're talking about applications, all the way through acceptances, during the time here, scheduling, all the academic schedule that you're actually put through, and the interface. We have a very, very strong staff here that works very, very hard to keep the program together. And probably one of the best features in this program is our direct relationship with industry. Here are 5 of our industry leaders who work directly with our teams: Lisa Earnhardt, Hanson Gifford, Beverly Huss, Maria Saints, and Cynthia Yopp. These are some of the biggest innovators in the field. Lisa, Beverly, and Maria are tied to a team. They directly work with teams every other week as business advisors, help you with your plans, your operations. You'll actually go and meet them at their offices. Hanson Gifford, you're fortunate enough he actually donates his time every week. One of the premier innovators in the field, who's really one of the original core people of the Foundry, who's now developed 13 or 14 different technologies in the healthcare space. And I can't leave out Cynthia Yopp, who has been a leader in the value-driven innovation space, who works on healthcare economics. So let's talk a little bit about how biodesign fits into design thinking. We really believe fundamentally in the clinical need. And so this idea that you need to be exposed to the clinical field directly, you need to experience it, you need to be there, you don't just read about it. And so access to the clinics, to outpatient interfaces between the patient, the physician, and the healthcare system. Also directly looking at patients who are having procedures, whether it's surgery, minimally invasive procedures, medical therapy, and their recovery. We also believe strongly in the broad-based approach of healthcare, how it's moving out of the hospital base and into more clinic and outpatient environments and into home care. We think that's an important opportunity to reduce costs and deliver value to the healthcare system. So we think it's important to not just see these things, but to actually be important to break them down and to characterize needs, and then ultimately use them as a foundation to ideate, prototype, and test. This is the biodesign approach directly. It really has 3 major components. The most important component is identify, which is really trying to teach people how to find good needs. There are many, many needs in the clinical environment. They are at various ranges of good and bad. Some of these needs are really important to be answered, and some of them are great needs that unfortunately represent not as much of an opportunity to solve because there's not the market opportunity to solve them. We're trying to teach you how to actually select good projects, how to select good areas to work on, and ultimately use them as a foundation to actually ultimately invent around and then implement. If you're out there and you're in an industry in which you've already got good ideas or good technology, it's using this process as a way to look back at, put on hold the invention, and do a needs finding process to understand where you might be able to apply the technology that you have. and ultimately the strategy of implementation. This is our 2017-2018 U.S. Fellows that we actually just graduated this last week. We break our groups into 3 teams. We have 2 pure innovation teams and a 3rd specialty team. The 2 innovation teams are comprised of physicians, engineers, and business operators in many different combinations. We think it's important that they have all these skill sets. Most people have multiple skills there within those teams. The specialty team is a little bit different. It takes 2 specialists in 2 different fields and brings them together along with some engineering talent. And that team will work in the field of the 2 specialists as opposed to the clinical area for the innovation fellows. So in other words, the red team and white team, we will use these folks to team up with a clinical department or division. We've done everything from ophthalmology to ENT. We've done cardiac surgery, general surgery. We've done GI, orthopedics, anesthesia, gynecology, radiology, and pediatrics. We've done all the clinical fields at least once, and we've often returned to do them a second time. The red and white team is really teamed up with that clinical department as their clinical area, including clinical faculty. Specialty team teams up with the clinical area of specialty of the specialists on that team. Oops. Let me come back one slide here. So I'm on the, we're a little delay in our process here. I apologize for our technical difficulties. So the biodesign experience really has a timeline that is uniquely different in the sense that we have a boot camp that runs the first 4 weeks. This is a didactic period of time when we schedule you to have 3 different functions to really interact in the clinical immersion field, whatever clinical team we've built up, whether that be orthopedics, for instance, this last year, gynecology the year before, to get basic lectures in the field and really drink from the fire hose of that clinical field. We also give you a core knowledge in innovation. So we teach you and bring in faculty to talk about company structure, to talk about intellectual property, to talk about how to do engineering basics. We share between these 2 areas as well as team building. Beyond the first 4 weeks of boot camp, we then go into really the mentorship phase, which will be the rest of the next 9 months, which is really broken up into clinical immersion, needs validation and selection, the brainstorming and prototyping, feasibility, periods that ultimately build the basis for the fellowship and the process we're trying to teach in biodesign. I'll come back and mention that we provide the opportunity for every fellow to do an externship as well as part of this fellowship. Clinical immersion, as I mentioned, is an opportunity to get directly into the clinical environment. All of our fellows, whether they're clinicians or not, are given access to the university hospital as well as the affiliated hospitals here at Stanford to go in and watch and observe cases to see where the opportunities are for clinical care, to hopefully interact with patients, to ask questions, understand what their needs are. One of our really fundamental components of our process is what we call the need statement, which is really this idea of the need. How do we characterize the need? The need statement is a fundamental component of the backbone of your entire project, whether it lasts the next 10 minutes or 10 years. And we often say it's a way to solve a problem in a population to a particular outcome. But these need statements take months to actually materialize and to perfect, and sometimes they're even modified after that. But we will teach you how to actually break down needs and how to understand them using need statements as a skill set. I say that because each of you will actually have the opportunity, a team, to come up and evaluate over 100 needs on each team and then put them into need statements. And here's an example from clinical immersion in just a week or 2 of clinical needs which the actual fellows were able to dig into. The needs validation process and selection is about then deciding which projects to pursue. And so this was where you've got to go deep and really try and understand the background market opportunity, the clinical science in that area, the existing technologies that also exist within that clinical field. And probably one of the most difficult things to understand if you're outside healthcare is stakeholder issues. Who ultimately decides? The hospital, the provider, the insurance system, a secondary component of any of these, who ultimately dictates how care is practiced. As a result, understanding who takes care of the patient, who controls the patient, often dictates who ultimately has the biggest impact in healthcare. It's important to understand all these components as it relates to the need, to then have needs compete with each other. So you can filter your 100 needs down to 40 and then ultimately down to 12, working your way through the year to ultimately having 2 projects and a lead project by the time we entered the April month. So as I mentioned, we start with over 200, filter our way down to 80, 24, 8, and 4. This process is by having needs can directly compete with each other to see which of them have the best opportunity to move forward. We think that top-level data is the most important data, crunches market size and impact to make the decisions from moving from 200 to 80, to ultimately 24. You need to have as you go deeper into your knowledge base of each of these projects, we eliminate projects so that you will spend more time on more fruitful projects as you move ultimately into brainstorming. Typically between 8 and 12 projects will have some early brainstorming on them. A great project means a great need with a great concept, and ultimately take those forward into concept development and implementation. One of the greatest challenges is really trying to understand market size, and this is not a US-centric observation. More and more healthcare is actually global, and as a result, trying to understand how to dig up market data, not just to understand the US market, but to understand also the European, Asian, and third world markets. So market sizing, as well as the treatment landscape and patient impact, are probably some of the most important first screens to use in trying to ultimately make decisions on fruitful projects. And then we ask things like market pathway and access in addition to those. Physician, hospital, payer impact plays a big component in understanding the stakeholders and how they impact needs. And this is before we've actually ever invented anything. So we spend the first 3 to 4 months literally looking at opportunity as opposed to trying to invent something and find a place for it to work. The idea being that if you have a great clinical need, a problem that needs to be solved, that's been validated by market opportunity, that there's a gap in solutions that are out there, that there's good science to support the disease mechanism, and that you have alignment of stakeholders, these are great projects to spend your time brainstorming on. But not all of these needs will necessarily come up with a great concept. We only need one great need with a great concept and a strategy to move forward for implementation. So brainstorming is an important part of this. And so as we run through setting the framework of need, we then need to move into the phase of concept generation, brainstorming, and the importance of prototyping. We have a very strong core faculty here. We also are very fortunate to have the product realization laboratory just across the street, where we have 8 full-time TAs that will help you in prototyping and 3D printing, multiple different modes of development and different materials to try and come up with your ideas and prototyping to test your hypothesis on concepts. This example is Ross Vanook, who's on the far right of this picture in red, who's been with our faculty and in fact won one of the university's highest honors this last year for teaching faculty. So screening, some of the most important aspects of once you have a concept is really moving from the invention to the feasibility stage and starting to look at things like IP, so freedom to operate versus patentability, what the ideal business model is, what the regulatory pathway is, whether this is 510K, an exemption, a de novo, or potentially an IDE. This language will become very familiar for you as you move through the fellowship. And then probably one of the most difficult challenges today is payment. I say payment because payment doesn't necessarily require reimbursement. Reimbursement is one strategy for payment, but as the consumerization of medicine kind of moves on, we kind of see that there's other strategies for developing healthcare to patients, and it doesn't necessarily always require reimbursement. So we really believe in trying to build the framework of implementation that you're going to need to do market validation, functional testing, qualification, be prepared to design clinical trials, and then come through a pathway of commercialization. You can't just plan that, but you obviously need to build a framework to be able to have a plan to move forward with implementation. Biodesign is not about implementation. It's about building a framework, a background for implementation, so you can think about what it will take to take the project forward, how you will build investors, what your milestones will be, and what your trial strategy will be. So let's talk a little bit about the experience for customization. So we now run the fellowship from August 1st and through the end of April. We then provide the opportunity for fellows to do an externship, and these are just a few of the places that in the last 2 years our fellows have done externships, including venture groups like Sofanova based in Paris, Longitude Capital based here, several corporates such as Stryker and Medtronic, and other area and interesting areas like IDEO. So these are areas which you can go and spend a month, get an opportunity to get a real world experience to complement what you've actually been able to learn here at Biodesign. Often many of these organizations are interested in you using the skills you've acquired here at Biodesign to apply to some of the interesting questions they want to ask during your fellowship. And ultimately, we believe in having fun. This is a very, very hard schedule. We work people very, very hard, but at the same time, we think it's important that you also smell the roses. And so we really enjoy spending time together. There's a number of social events that we set up for the fellows to interact with their families. This really is one big family, and we think it's important that everyone learns to work together. This is the small network that you're going to have for the rest of your career, whether you're here at Biodesign or somewhere else. This is a pretty small group of people who move forward in this industry, and it's important that you learn how to work together. And here last is just a couple examples. This is our incoming fellows that will be starting August 1st for this next year. That announcement was just made a few weeks ago to the outside world, posted on our website. There's some background and bios on all 12 of the fellows that will be coming here into the program here at Stanford starting August 1st. And last, I think that we couldn't really do this justice unless we talked really about what our final product is. This is an educational incubator. Although we have 47 companies that have come from Biodesign over the course of the last 17 years, the ultimate product is these folks. These are the graduates of the program. We're now 215 strong. Fellows that actually will go out and hopefully go to startups, they'll go to large cap companies, they'll go to academia, and they'll be the next generation of innovation leaders.
Thank you so much, Todd. All right, everyone, we'd be happy to take your questions now. If you type them into the Q&A function on the bottom of your dashboard here. So we'll get started.
All right, so is it some questions, and I'll just read them back to you. Is it possible to work full-time and do the fellowship at the same time? And the answer is, it's a great question, is unfortunately not. This is a full-time effort. We do expect that you actually commit yourself to the fellowship full-time. As a result, we do not charge tuition to the fellows. We actually provide and cover those costs, and we provide a stipend, and I call it a stipend, not a salary. It's this next year based on 12 months, $60K. It's not a big salary, but it's enough to kind of cover your cost of living here in the Bay Area and provide you the opportunity to live, because we expect that your 100% effort is towards your project team and your projects and learning. Does the Biodesign Fellowship encourage filing patents before filtering and validating ideas? So the answer is no. We believe that you should write them down and document them. But the idea is that you move the fundamental work and needs finding first before you build a foundation in invention. That there is a lot of inventions in the PTO that are out there that are not enabled because they were not necessarily the right project. Great novel ideas, but without a clinical need, they don't really have a great place. Now, there's a few exceptions. You have a great idea. We are in a world where we call first to file now as opposed to first to invent. And so if you had a great idea that you thought along the way, we might encourage you to file as a provisional, to do a placeholder, and then leave it, set it aside, and ultimately come back to it later when we are in the process of asking whether this invention might fit your clinical need. And so we believe really strongly that clinical need is the most important element of really getting to a good project. Many projects fail as a result of they have great concepts and great conventions, but they don't have great clinical needs. And so we want to get it right. We want to build a foundation first and then apply these novel concepts to these great ideas. Next question, which is, what are the most important qualities you look for in candidates? So I will tell you that hunger is probably the greatest predictor of success in this program. We're looking for people that are hungry and are willing to work very, very hard. As I mentioned before, and we'll come back to this, this is a unique fellowship. It's at the university. We call it a fellowship. It's not a clinical fellowship in the same way that clinical training is done. It's a program mentorship, much like a postdoctorate fellowship, where you actually come here, you have an idea of what you want to accomplish, and we provide the resources to do so and the guidance and supervision. This is not a daily didactic program. This is self-driven. So you need to actually be willing to want to get out there, to want to get in the hospital, to find great projects, to do the digging, to then validate these needs with your own experience and in working. And then you're often going to find that there's results of talking to many of the faculty that you get different answers. Much like you talk to advisors in the real world, that some may say you should move forward in one way or the other, and you'll have to make a decision the best way to move forward. We think that's the most real world way to really innovate. And we try to provide that environment here at Stanford, while you really kind of have one foot in the university and one foot out in industry. It says, looking at the bios of past fellows, most seem to be fairly early career individuals. Is there their interest in mid-career participation as well? I will tell you that over the course of the last 15 years, and this will be my 13th year, the mix of fellows has changed. We still have lots of people who are early. We have some people that are much later, but in general, we've moved from people being more experienced as they've moved through the years of fellowship. So I would say that 10 years ago, it was not uncommon to take someone straight out of a master's program or potentially straight out of a PhD program. Although we take people now, I would say that in general, we're looking for people that have more years of experience in the pure competition of the fellowship, usually getting over 200 applications globally, very, very qualified individuals, makes that we're looking for people who have more experience. And as a result, we're looking for some mid-career people. The question is why? Why are you interested in doing this fellowship? If you're interested in a career pivot, that's probably not the reason to come to biodesign. If you're looking to broaden your base, to actually learn another skill, to become more entrepreneurial, and you've been had very good training, but been in a great educational program, had work experience, and you're now ready to kind of take the next step, I think that's a great reason to come to the Biodesign Fellowship. It says, let's see, if you are an international student, do you provide visas? Yes, in fact, we do provide often J1 visas. We do that through the university. So we do have visa support for those that need it. It's on a basis of need. And we do an analysis and kind of run through, but whether you're international or here based in the United States, we do not have preference for one group over another. In fact, we had 3 international fellows coming in. I think we have 3 international fellows this next year. And so we do provide, and we do begin that process very early. Our expectation on the timeline is that we will interview in October and ultimately make our decisions in November to early December, have contracts out, and have people's commitments by the end of the year, 6 months to 9 months before we start the fellowship. Who owns the IP generated by the fellows in biodesign? Another great question. So the university owns everything, just like they own everything that I make. So you are an employee of the university as a postdoc or graduate researcher. So if you are a bachelor's degree trainee or master's degree trainee, you come in as a graduate researcher here at the university. If you are a PhD or MD, you come in as a postdoc. They have the exact same status within the biodesign program. They are paid exactly the same. But as a result, you are paid a stipend, you are required to assign your IP to the university. This is actually to your advantage. And the reason why is the IP that's generated is ultimately then supported by the university. They pay the fees to actually support the development. We'll hire a law firm to do the IP work, potentially file the PCT for global coverage of those patents, and actually ultimately draft and work with you on development of intellectual property. The university has a policy, what's called the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 rule. 1/3 of this royalty stream belongs to the inventors. Those are the inventors coming from biodesign or a combination of biodesign and maybe a clinical department. 1/3 of it belongs to the department and 1/3 of it belongs to the school. Beyond that, though, our 47 companies have had outside funding license the technology, and then they become a member of that team outside the university. So there's kind of 2 ways to develop the intellectual property and benefit, either through a royalty stream within the university or outside licensing and developing technologies. And we've had a number of these exit and be acquired by large cap companies. How often do you accept candidates that don't hold a master's, PhD, or MD? How are passion and experience valued for candidates that only have a bachelor's degree? So we take a number of people with bachelor's degrees. It really comes down to a combination of training and experience. So a bachelor's degree with a number of years of experience, a hunger, a demonstration for an interest in innovation, who wants to come back and says, my choices are to go to do the fellowship, to go do a master's, to go do a PhD. I'm going to choose the fellowship because I'm ready to kind of take the next step, is valued the same as anyone that has a PhD or a master's. We are valuing the individual. Their experience is important, but what the reason they want to be here and why they want to come to the fellowship and what they want to learn is probably one of the biggest predictors of what we're interested in learning. Does the externship ever last longer than the fellowship or lead to other projects? So this last year, the externship lasted 5 weeks. That was a good length of time. It was went from 4 weeks in the years past to 5 weeks. It is a period of time which you have an opportunity to interact directly with a venture group, a large cap, a incubator. Yes, many of our fellows have extended that time after, have ultimately become consultants to those groups moving forward. Some of them ultimately joined those groups, let's say a large cap company. They were offered a job as a result of their externship. I know some of them have joined a venture group as an advisor. It's not an absolute guarantee. It doesn't happen all the time, but it's an opportunity. And some people will use the externship component to explore an area that they'll never have a chance to do again in their career. Some of you use an opportunity to trial their experience in a field to see if they'd be interested in working in a large cap environment, or for instance, an incubator that they think they may not know whether they want to work in that environment, and it provides an opportunity to be exposed. How are teams formed? So we form the teams. So our process of interviewing, we'll interview this year 30 people here. In the past, we've interviewed 24. We're going to open that up this next year to 30 individuals, and the dates have already been provided on the website for interviews. When we do extend offers after the application state, we'll tell you that we're extending an interview. Those interviews are 2 days. We don't have exceptions. We need you to come to Stanford and interview for those 2 days and spend the time here. There are exceptions for medical need or such, which we can interview you by Skype. With that exception, if you're capable, we'll pay for you to fly here to Stanford. We will cover the cost of you being here at Stanford. You'll have to get to Stanford to actually interview. And in that interview process, we'll assess really your background, your interest, and from that, and putting together the interviews, we assemble teams. Why? Because it's important that teams be balanced, that we have clinical expertise, engineering, operational design, product management onto each team. And so we do a lot of in-depth interviews to try and understand a little bit more about you to assemble the teams. Does that mean the teams are perfect? Nope, it doesn't mean they're perfect, but they're the teams we put together for this educational process. Our clinical medical residency fellows considered early or mid-career applicants. I would say that medical residents are probably early to mid. I think it depends. We have people that have come in the middle of their surgical training. So surgical residents, not common after their third year to come here for a year or two during their surgical training. There would probably still be fairly early career. We have people who have finished their training and have practiced a year and they come, they're a little closer to mid-career. And their training, both of them are very viable. I wouldn't focus so much on the components of how many years, but really what you've done and why you've done it, what you're interested in, and why you want to do this fellowship, why it fits for you. As I said, hunger and a drive are the biggest predictors of success in being an innovator, and we want to see those same aspects here. Are these opportunities to extend the fellowship to 2 years? If so, what would the second year look like? So with the exception of general surgical training residents who are required to do 2 years for ACGME, the fellowship is 1 year and a second year if you can establish funding. Now let me say that again. If you were, for instance, to establish funding within the program, we've had a few people that have done this during their first year, and you can want to extend a second year to stay where you've been able to secure the funding and support through external sources, we would then consider possibly having a second year. With that exception, the fellowship is really built around, for the most part, a 1 year fellowship. Surgical trainees are here for 2 years. They're really the only group because they are required to do 2 years by ACGME requirements. Other areas of medical and surgical specialty generally are only required to do 1. Do we meet former fellows, and what do past fellows typically do after the fellowship? So yes, in fact, you'll meet during boot camp. The Faculty Alumni Association, which is actually quite active and has mixers generally every 6 weeks or so, has dinner speakers, helps each other with jobs. They will meet you during the boot camp. They actually host a cocktail party and a barbecue to get a chance to meet them. You're actually paired up with a faculty kind of partner, and that partner then helps you kind of get integrated into the local area. We then have the opportunity to spend more time with the alumni. Where do the alumni go? They are going in different aspects. Some of them will work on the projects they've done here and started. Some will work on new projects. Some will join incubators. Some of them will join large cap companies. Some of them will go back to academic training. For instance, a resident needs to finish a residency. Some will take academic jobs because they're done with their fellowship in academia as assistant professors, for instance. So I'd say it runs the gamut. More, I would say that we've moved to people doing more industry-based jobs, probably in academic, than startups in the last few years because of kind of the changes in venture capital availability and funding. But that tends to come and go. And we see a lot of excitement moving forward into funding some of these earlier projects as things move forward kind of in the next few years. For those who are engineers, what kind of specific skills do you value the most? I hate to be redundant, but I would say that there's not a specific skill. We think that thought engineers are just as valuable as design engineers. We're interested in looking at computer science, electrical engineering, mechanical, biomedical engineering, the full gamut of engineering sciences. We're interested in people who have experience in prototyping and building, and those that are more based on theoretical design in their engineering training. Again, to be redundant, we're looking for hunger. We're looking for people who are passionate about building medical devices for patients. For the video, can we talk about anything, or would you like to get to know our background? And the answer is we really go through 2 questions, and I can read those questions to you right now. We really only want you to answer these 2 questions on the video. The rest of the time, your essays can provide more background. The idea of the video is to get a chance to focus directly on you. We're not looking for you to animate the videos, to add anything extra, to just answer the question on video, these 2 questions. The first is, describe a decision you made that was a failure. What happened and why, and what do you and how do you build rapport with your colleagues, and include specific examples. Okay. Let me go on to the next question. Are you looking forward to hiring more mentors, consultants for driving this program? I'm not sure the question. We have a huge number of mentors and consultants for this program. Most of our mentors are voluntary, so they're not paid consultants. We're very fortunate that they donate their time. For instance, our business advisors actually donate huge numbers of time, hundreds of hours to meeting with their fellows. They do so. They're not paid by the program. They do it as in a sense of paying it forward for the people who actually help them in their career. Bev, Maria, and Lisa are both really experienced executive CEOs. They've been in both private and public companies, and as a result, they really want to give back, and they donate a lot of the time. Hanson has been kind of the core in multiple different companies. It is now at the founding, probably one of the most successful health care incubators over the course of the last 15 years. And as a result, this is the way they give back. Are there certain former teams that stick out in your mind as particularly effective, and what makes them great? That's a good question. I'd have to take a little bit of time to reflect. I've had a lot of teams. So this is, I just finished my 12th year. I've had probably 32 teams over that course of time. I think that teams that find a way to work together, that aren't necessarily looking for individual fame, that are looking at team effort, all do the best within this program. They're the most creative. They're the teams that are the most diverse, that really come and bring different areas of discipline, different backgrounds, and different experiences, bring the greatest richness to a team. But we have a flat hierarchy within the teams, to be clear. There is no manager. This is for very motivated, heavily driven folks that want to innovate. And as a result, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when conflict occurs. We talked about respectful disagreement, and it's your job to actually kind of push back on projects when you think they should be done a different way. But it's important you do so respectfully, and learning how to voice your opinion and work with people that are just as passionate about what they're doing as you are. And so I'd say the teams that stick out in my mind are those teams that have functioned the best because they've been committed to their team. They have fun outside the work environment. They spend time together with their families. They are, I think, what are the teams that develop the best work product. I am not coming from a background of biology. I am coming from an engineering physics background. I have a pharma, background in development, which I would like to take to the next level. Would this fit your agenda? So I would say that certainly we've had people who've come from pharma in the past or biologics. To be very, very clear, this is not a training ground for development in the pharma or biologic space. Biodesign is typically based on, almost all the time, understanding the fundamental need and developing technology for it. Most biologics and pharma are based on basic discovery, a knockout receptor, which we kind of say, how can we then apply this? And where do we take it back to the need, ask about where we could use this knockout for a receptor, for instance, and then take it ultimately back to the bench. And so it's a different process. That being said, we've had people that have trained in pharma that have tried to kind of move over to med tech. That's not an unreasonable approach. It doesn't have to be in engineering. As I said, it can be a core in science. How are needs of low resource settings understood and established while staying at Stanford? So again, we think it's important. We actually, this year, are actually at the county hospitals. We're in free clinics. We're at the university environment at Stanford and at the VA hospital. So I think we have a broad base of resources. We also often look at needs that are outside the space. We think it's important that people really understand limited resources. Value is a really important metric for us. It's not good enough to be better anymore, to deliver a better way of doing something. It has to be more value-driven and better, deliver a better outcome at a reduced cost, which ultimately means delivering greater value. What about the global faculty program? How different is it from the year-long fellowship, and how does the selection work? So our global program is typically based for nationals in those countries. So India and Singapore. Singapore being broad, we allow people from Malaysia and from China as well to apply for that program. So if you're not a national from those countries, you can't really apply to the program. They're extremely competitive with a large number of applicants. This is really a global, we say it's a US-based program. It's really a global program as well. We have fellows from across the world. Keep in mind that most of the technologies that are developed here, the near market is Europe or Asia before it's the US market. And as a result, you're going to have understand the global market and what the potential for the technology are. You may choose to start at the United States or to not start in the United States or never be in the United States and have a viable product that maybe meets the needs of patients in Europe. We don't preference one versus the other, but we do spend a lot of time on resource constraints opportunities. But we need to find a way to have a viable business model to move forward. So this is not a project that can be funded by the Gates Foundation forever. It has to be viable and eventually be able to be independent. About how many applicants do you receive for this program? We typically receive several hundred. Usually the application process starts with almost 300 people starting applications. This last year, I believe we had about 170 applications that were complete. That means that they had all their letters in on time, all their transcripts in on time. And I'll tell everyone right now, we have a deadline. That deadline will come up faster than you think. Letters will take longer to get here than you anticipate. Transcripts will take longer. It's always difficult for us, but we have such a competitive process. Your letters and your transcripts must be received by the deadline along with your application in order for us to review it. That typically takes us down to about 170, 180 applications. Let me walk you through the review process. We review in a two-step process. We have an alumni committee comprised of 12 people. It'll be 7 women and 5 men this year. They have been on the committee before. They review applications blinded to the individual. They'll score those applications, and ultimately the top, generally 75% of those applications will proceed to the full admissions committee. The admissions committee has 12 people on it as well, mixed male, female. That will then review the applications as well. We'll score the applications. Every application is read blindly by 2 different faculty members and then scored. And then we take the top scores of each reviewer into a group. And then we spend time reviewing the ideas of who we're going to extend offers to. And then we will this year interview 30 people, which is 6 more than we've interviewed in the past, to ultimately make 12 offers for the fellowship. If we have a few ideas to work on already, can we present them on the application as a possible project? If we do that, is there a possibility to work on it? So I would encourage you to have projects, but I would keep them to yourself. This is really based on finding projects here at Stanford during your time. You have a great idea, you want to work on it. My suggestion is put it on hold, come here to the program, because we want you to work in the field that we've chosen. And we don't make that announcement and we don't apologize for it until you get here. We do not think that the area of focus, whether that be orthopedics, gynecology, ENT, ophthalmology, matters. We think it's important, though, that you work with your team. And when you bring a project in from the outside in your team, there's an ownership issue of who really owns it. And as a result, we think you should keep those projects to yourself. Get the training and work on these projects as a learning experience, take them forward if appropriate, and then from that experience, then apply it to your own projects. We're looking to develop not just innovators, we're looking to develop serial innovators. And so there are people who will have one project. We're interested in you having projects for the rest of your career, and that can be your next project. Last 2 questions. Is there an age limit for participating in the program? The answer is no, there's absolutely no age limit. The question is really why you want to do the program, how it fits into your kind of plan for your career, and how we can make you better. And the last question is, how do you value entrepreneurial experience? What if I do not have any entrepreneurial background, but I have a strong biomedical engineering background and driven to make a difference? I think then you've got many of the pieces of what we're looking for. So we are interested in people who are interested in being innovators. So you don't need to be an entrepreneur. We're looking for innovators. There's different types of innovators. There are people that are interested in innovating in large company structures, in academia, or as entrepreneurs. And so there's no greater value given to one or the other. We really are interested in why you want to come to the program, what you want to do with your skills, and what you're missing, how we can make you better. Ultimately, this is not just about you being interested in coming to the program or us being interested in you. It goes both ways. This has to fit for you of what your career interests are, and we think that it has to fit for what we think we can provide you as far as training. So with that, I'll wrap it up. If I would encourage you, if you have additional questions, to pass them on to Emily. We can happy to get back to you with details. As I mentioned before, Emily Johnson is really the centerpiece, the really go-to person here at Stanford to ask questions, to follow up about applications, deadlines, your process, if you're having trouble getting things in, timeline, transcripts, letters of recommendation. But let me just say one more time that letters and transcripts always takes much longer than you anticipate. Those of you that have been doing this for a long time, have applied to many programs, understand that you need to be ahead. Do not wait till the last week and then frantically say, I'm sorry, my advisor didn't write a letter, because they're busy. I write many, many letters. It's hard to keep up. So I encourage you to ask for those letters early and follow them up. Check with us to make sure we have all the letters and that your application is complete by the deadline, because we certainly don't want to miss the opportunity to have you in the pool of applicants. And then last thing is, we will have an alumni a webinar where you'll have the opportunity to have several alumni talk about the program and give you their experience. And there's no better way to learn about the program than ask the customer. So this is an opportunity to ask questions on why they chose the program, what they're doing, what careers they're doing now, and why they chose them. And that'll be this next month. So with that, I think we'll sign off. Thank you very much for your time.